you can't sleep on the plane. I better kick it off. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue with John Taylor Gatto. I'd like to just make a little announcement. The tea and coffees, we're finding it very hard to keep up with the amount of people that are here, so we do apologise if you've been inconvenienced in any way, shape or form with the coffee. We're trying to give you the best coffee. It's not Gloria Jean's or Macca's coffee, we understand that, and it's not Macca's or Gloria Jean's service, but we're all volunteers and we're doing our best. So if you can just be a bit mindful of that. Event like this are actually, you know, I've been behind the scenes for a while now, and I can tell you there's a lot that goes on to put an event like this together. So just please, just go easy on the
Thanks for sitting through the first half. The second half will be just as long, I'm afraid. The keenest of all the minds who set down a plan for the kind of schools that we're all familiar with was this 17th century Dutch philosopher Spinoza. Instead of using the whole name of his book, which I know you all recall is Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, I'm just going to call it the Tractate. So his tractate on reshaping civil society in order to stamp out irrationality continues to this moment to have immense influence in what are called policy circles. This is beyond the reach of telly, where people sit around and plan our fate. And in the fashions of mass schooling, because its central strategy involves destroying the public imagination as a way to control the masses. Spinoza is quite clear that the target is your imagination. Religious thought was a principal villain for Spinoza, but he thought that would be easy to take care of if the government made a great show of support for churches, while at the same time it infiltrated the religious inner sanctum to control the myths and illusions it was broadcasting. The public would never be aware that this policy was at work. Does that sound conspiratorial to you? This book is published in 1670. That's 337 years ago. Can you smell the brimstone yet? Spinoza's second proposal led to our familiar school structure. It called for a substitute religion to be created, which he called a civil religion, that's school, to be managed by the political state and its selected agents. That's why you have to have a license from the state to enter the school business. And it was made a compulsory monopoly. In this new institution, the habits, the attitudes, the status, and the ambitions of ordinary folk would be trained under the guise of assisting in personal intellectual development. But habit training and attitude training is what it's about. The rest of it's window dressing. Lastly, the full weight of all social institutions would focus on destroying the inner life of ordinary people so they would lose the power to imagine. And if you lose the power to imagine, you can't think of any effective way to resist management. The methods to do this, as I told you in the first half, have been well known for thousands of years. You only need to read Plato's Republic or his Utopia of the Laws to see that the Greeks were right up to speed on ruining people's inner life if that's what they wanted to do. The way you do it is through rigid routines and drills, through weakening home authority, through the removal of privacy, through regular interventions into personal time that would otherwise be used for reflection, and regular interventions into working time. Has it ever crossed your mind, since I know most of you must have attended schools, why when you're working on something, you have to stop when a horn or a buzzer rings and go somewhere else? You might be in the middle of a painting and now you have to stop, march over, and think mathematically, and you may be catching on to an idea, and a horn goes off and you have to go somewhere else. I'm sure it's crossed some of your minds that this is a crazy way to learn anything, not to finish what you start. And yet, this is part of the destruction of your inner life. If you never get to finish, then it's not too exciting to start something new because you know that you're going to be interrupted constantly. So carrot and stick incentives to promote obedience. That's the pat on the head and the gold star and the nice little note on your report card. And plenty of testing to be certain that deviance never gets a foothold. The tests, as you'll see in a few minutes, don't measure anything. And this has been known for centuries. Nobody uses the results of the test for anything serious because the test isn't measuring what it seems to measure. But what it does measure is whether you obediently memorized what you were told to memorize. And the people who won't do that have to be punished. With Spinoza, we reach into the beating heart of institutionalized schooling. And ironically, if you have any friends who are philosophically inclined, they'll tell you, no, Spinoza's a champion of intellectual liberty. And the truth is, for a privileged few, he was. He said about 20% of the population have rational minds. And for them, he wanted intellectual liberty. But for the rest, he's liberty's worst nightmare. Spinoza sentenced the mass population to a lifetime of misdirection, manipulation, and lies. Those aren't my characterizations, they're his. This is the way you deal with irrational people. You lie to them, you manipulate them, and you misdirect their attention. The school empire is his legacy more than anyone else's. As he instructed, subjects exist primarily to inculcate fables, which colonize the inner life of the dangerous classes. Isn't that an interesting expression? The reason you're dangerous, unless you're part of the good 20%, is there's nothing can be done for your madness. Don't you see? Darwin said there's nothing can be done, and Wundt said there's nothing can be done, and Spinoza says there's nothing can be done, and Calvin says there's nothing can be done. But school's a way to misdirect the dangerous classes out of the hair of the good stuff. But this Dutchman was only a theorist. So how did his scheme come alive in human affairs? Frederick of Prussia and a professor of philosophy whose name you've now heard, Johann Fichte, were the great tacticians who realized Spinoza's design. In 1806, after a humiliating defeat by the professional armies of Prussia at the hands of the amateur armies of Napoleon, Fichte made a series of public demands that are quite famous. They will be in every library in Brisbane, called the Addresses to the German Nation. And in these addresses, which were really orders given to the king, he demanded, I'm quoting, that all Germany be molded into a corporate body. Germany in 1806 was about 160 tiny little countries. There was no hope they would ever unify, although that was the great dream of the Pope, as long as they weren't Protestant there. But there was no hope of that. Now Fichte has ordered that they be molded into a corporate body. Then he demanded, I'm quoting, these are his words, not mine, that freedom of the will be completely destroyed. He demanded the inner lives of the young be so thoroughly scrubbed clean of individual will that no student would be even capable of imagining wishes other than the wishes of the state managers. When you encounter men and women or boys and girls who have free time but no idea what to do with that time, who tell you they're bored, you are in the presence of the outcome, the human products of Fichte's design. The point of the new schooling was plain and simple, psychological conditioning, not academics. The routines of the school day is what the school day is about. The rest of it is air and smoke. It's window dressing. The routines are what's being taught. Prussian schooling was past its trial stage by 1819, and soon after that, delegations from all over the world, from as far away as Japan, were visiting to see this new wonder in action. By 1868, the Japanese Constitution was the Prussian Constitution translated into Japanese. That's how influential Prussian schooling was. And it was brought back to America by Horace Mann. That's a name that resonates, doesn't have to resonate in Australia. He was a jerk. And it was attempted to be forced on the whole country, but the country wasn't buying. Exactly one state bought into the Prussian system, the state of Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, where the Puritans had settled. They bought into it, and for the next 15 years, no other American state followed suit, and the government in Washington was busy bribing everyone they could. That's how governments get things done, subsidizing this or that project. But it took 15 years before one other state followed suit. And at the end of the First World War, it took that long before America swallowed the whole Prussian bait. During World War II, Prussian schooling scored its knockout blow. It put critical reading ability to death. with the assistance of key universities, book publishers, and friends in high places. Germany provided the heavy weapon in the form of something known as the whole word system of learning to read, which in this part of the world is associated with New Zealand and its schooling. Prior to the introduction of the German whole word system, where you actually study the language like hieroglyphics, you memorize whole words. In Germany, it was, first they tried the whole paragraph system, and that was too much to swallow. Then the whole sentence system, and that was pretty much too much to swallow. But the whole word, good. You can memorize a few thousand words, and you can seem to be able to read as long as you don't encounter new stuff. When you encounter new stuff, you are helpless. If you were able to pronounce the new stuff, in your mind might very well be a meaning or a half meaning that you had heard. But with the whole word system, you can't pronounce the new stuff. In the former system, which was called the alphabet system, you break the language into 44 sight-sound correspondences. It's a little painful to memorize those, but it doesn't take more than 90 days. At that point, the truth is you can read anything on earth, including Spinoza's tractate Theologico-Politicus. You won't understand it, but reading is two separate processes. First is cracking the sound code, and then the understanding and the mastery is a separate undertaking. Now, put yourself back in first, second, or third grade. If Australia is not totally unlike the United States, what the teacher thinks is going on in those classrooms and what's actually going on are wildly different. Those are psychological laboratories. They're filled with tension and energy. You're sitting there hoping that the girl in the southeast corner of the room will look your way and smile, and you live in terror as she looked your way and laughed at you. So exactly how bold and brave are you to attempt to sound out new words in the face of humiliation that might lead to you being punched out by the bully after class? You're not very enterprising about guesswork at all. And what the whole word system encourages you to do is guess about words. You don't have to guess if you learn the 44 sight-sound correspondences. I've had kids who never ate off a tablecloth, who can stand up at age 13 and flawlessly read from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Probably not a book that's read often in Australia, but it's got to be the hardest American novel ever written. Flawlessly, it's read as well as I can, because they know the sight-sound correspondences. So during cover of the Second World War, and with the active help of Washington, D.C., this whole word method was imposed on the entire country. Why? Because to get anything done in the States prior to World War II was difficult, because reading was like a national addiction, and reading difficult stuff, not detective novels, difficult stuff. You only have to read some of the best-selling novels from the early 19th century to realize, and I've tried this experiment, that elite college students today have great difficulty reading this stuff. The sentences are hundreds of words long. They run backwards in the Latinate fashion. They have references, allusions to science and religion and politics and history. I mean, the trouble is all my examples are U.S. examples. Does Last of the Mohicans ring any sort of... You pick up Last of the Mohicans, make sure it's unexpurgated, and see what ignorant, unschooled farmers and their kids were reading in 1819. I mean, you'll faint. The book is like a PhD thesis at Harvard. And it sold the modern equivalent of 5 million copies. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which probably was the single most provocative trigger that caused the American Revolution to kick out Great Britain, and which is read today in graduate colleges by elite classes, sold the equivalent of 1 copy for every living human being in the United States prior to the American Revolution. There were 600,000 free people, not in slavery, and there were 600,000 copies of Common Sense sold. It wasn't a big time for rule-driven schooling, I can tell you, but people didn't have trouble with what elite college classes have trouble with today. I mean, the gulf between what you're capable of and what you're actually conditioned to do is vast. I mean, it's one of the reasons I really am in awe of the contract you've written for yourself, that you're going to do it. You're going to mix from this open source possibility. Anyway, let me get off soft soaping you and back to the drudgery. Okay. So they destroyed American reading ability. Reduced to drudgery, which whole word does, reading becomes a chore reserved for functional situations like business. Whole word readers are unlikely ever to be moved to read serious stuff. For example, Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars were read when I was growing up in a coal mining town during World War II. It was read in 7th grade. I have not in 15 years of traveling around ever encountered a contemporary class, including the most aristocratic, that reads Caesar's Gallic Wars. And some people, being defensive, say, well, we don't have time for that luxury of ancient Roman writing. Let me show you the degree to which you're bamboozled. Caesar's Gallic Wars is an absolute requirement of elite inner circle boarding schools, an absolute requirement, not because they want to put on the dog about having read Julius Caesar, but Caesar took a small army into what modern France is today. They were outnumbered 50-1 by perfectly brave, skilled warriors. 50-1 they were outnumbered, and they smeared those people into the ground. How did they do it? Not by killing 50 for every one they lost. Caesar invented a principle called divide and conquer, where you set people who should be allies against one another. You set them competing for little prizes, like top grade in the school or something, and you destroy this natural bond between them. Then you throw your favor first to one side, then to the other, and they kill one another. These days, figuratively, in those days, literally. Caesar didn't have to conquer Gaul. Gaul conquered itself. That's why you read Caesar's Gallic Wars. In 7th grade in a coal mining town, I read it in English translation. In 9th grade in a coal mining town, I had the option, as did everyone else, of reading it in Latin. Gallia est omnis tuissa in partes tres, quorum unum incolent belgae, aliam aquitani, qui ipsorum, thanks God, nostra Gallia appellantur. I could go a little bit farther, but not much more. But at one time, I could take you through the whole chapter. 9th grade in a coal mining town. Well, what on earth use is it to be able to read it in Latin? I'll tell you what use. Latin's the basis for all of the Romance languages. It instantly gooses positively your ability to understand and see the bones in French or English or Spanish or Italian. It's tremendously useful. Also, you get to be an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and they have the sacramental wine, and you can always find out where they keep the key. Well, no, they threw me out too. So that's why you read Caesar's Gallic Wars, and then you're able to read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Well, why would you want to read the Meditations of a Roman emperor? I'll tell you why it's still in print thousands of years after it was written, and why it's absolutely de rigueur in every elite private boarding school. The richest man in the world and the most powerful man in the world says that nothing you can buy is worth much. It's worth a little, but not much. And to the extent that you're addicted to buying things to feel good, you're a prisoner of your appetites. And the most powerful man in the world says, nothing you can compel someone else to do is worth doing. Because when you turn your back, some of these people will kill you. Now, can you see why the lessons of Caesar and Marcus Aurelius wouldn't be the kind of lessons that a hierarchical, top-heavy society wanted you to know? I mean, why would the CEO of a great corporation wish employees to know how you divide and conquer the employees by dangling one promotion in front of 16 people to see who's willing to sacrifice their family and lots more in order to have a chance to get it? And why, if they don't get it, they have to be fired right away or gotten rid of or marginalized. And you can see that what's locked up in the great classics is absolutely a set of revolutionary keys to free yourself from the propaganda of spin doctors, we call it in the United States. There's probably is that term here too? Okay. You're free of the spin doctors, and nobody wants you to be free of those, because now you're not trustworthy. Well, don't ever let an Italian step away from the script, or we'll be here days from now. All right. Let me just reconnect with this script. The most efficient way to secure your complicity in this situation is to teach you to voluntarily neutralize your own potential power. This is one of the primary missions of mass schooling. As Calvin said, to make you your own jailer. Its most useful tool, besides forced attendance, is